Hey everybody, welcome to Pop Culture Philosophers. It's time for Comics Revisited. Today we're going to be talking about a masterpiece, Akira. Very excited to chat with this one. We got a great panel assorted here. What's up, Manny? How you doing, buddy?
Oh, dude, I'm so excited to do this. This is like, you committed me to finishing a manga, dude. The first time in my life. So excited to talk about it.
Yeah, it's a classic. Absolutely. By, what is it? Katsuhiro Otomo or something like that?
Absolutely. That sounds correct to me.
It sounds correct to me. What about you, Brian? How you doing?
Oh, doing good. Awfully glad to be here. Yeah, I've been excited about doing this one for a while. I also don't have a lot of experience with manga, but I remember when this movie came out in the late 80s and watching it and thinking it was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen back then. It was kind of hard to get the issues back then, but the first time I actually read the whole book was Your Trades. About 5 years ago, I want to say, I know we're going to get into a lot of it. So I'm excited to talk about this one.
Yeah, back in the day, it was rather difficult, rather hard to find these issues. Some would even say that it will.
Now I'd like 2 eggs over hard.
Over hard. All right. Speaking of
that time.
Oh yeah, I know. And I
knew it was coming.
What's up, Brooks? How you doing? Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
You excited to talk about Akira?
You bet, man. This is the first manga I ever actually read.
It's the first manga I've ever read too. Yeah, and I think it wasn't the first anime that I watched. It's talking about the movie, but it was the first one I liked. If that makes sense. All right. So this was what was it? This was originally serialized and published in like chapter form, bi-weekly, starting in like late 70s or early 80s, something like that. It went up until 1990. Like it wasn't even done, right? Like when the movie came out or something like that, right?
In book 3 when they did the movie.
Yeah, you can kind of tell, right? You can kind of tell when you watch it. I love this book. It's absolutely amazing. I loved it back in the day. The artwork is dense and layered and filled with texture. And so is the story. It's dense, it's layered, it's filled with texture. And I think it's one of the most epic, grandiose comic books that has ever been put together. Manga, comic, whatever you want to call it, it's just a damn masterpiece. This one just knocks me off my socks. I remember reading it years ago, loving it, collecting it, then eventually just kind of letting that collection wander off. And then I recently, like several years ago, got the trade paperbacks back in. These are the Dark Horse collections that they had before they started doing the Kodansha ones or whatever that they do now. And then, of course, Brian's got that awesome box set where it's in the original format, so it's not the mirrored images, which does kind of bother me, so I kind of want that. But on the revisit, this one was absolutely masterful. I freaking love this book. Overall, I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's genius. I'm gushing over this book so much. I've repeated myself like 3 times, so I'm going to throw it over to Manny. Manny, what do you think about this book overall?
Overall, I think this is definitely probably the most epic comic I've ever read, manga, comic, whatever, on either side that can sprawl this long and hold my attention the entire time. It's 2,000 some odd pages, right? All together. Now I had the 38 individual issues to read, and at the beginning of each one there's like I don't know, a 12 column spread recapping everything that happened.
Yeah.
I literally just finished reading it, and I'm so enthralled by the story, I'm continuing to just read the recap every single time. You got to understand, I skip the intro on Peacemaker every episode because I can't sit for 3 minutes to listen to an intro. But in this, I could read all of these columns over and over and over again. It's just so good. You talked about textures and layers and density in the book. That's the best way to describe it. I don't know that I've ever looked at a panel and seen so much detail in every building. You can get lost looking at backgrounds in this. It is so good, and it's relatable in the most unrelatable circumstance. I mean, between the plot, the characters, none of that is relatable, yet you can relate to it. It's so masterfully written. I love everything about it, and I'm going to continue to ramble if you let me. So I'm going to pass it on to Brian.
Well, yeah, it is a very expansive world, right? And it has that connection to us as the audience, because even though we could not put ourselves in some of these crazy sci-fi situations, these cyberpunk situations that are presented in this book, the emotions, the characters, they're all there. And what I love is that it's when you start this book, you very clearly think you know what side is good, what side is bad, and all that changes, right? We recently did the best comics of the month panel for February and I was talking about Saga, and I was like, I'm rereading Akira right now. There's a lot of that in Saga where you have, like, for me, the Colonel, who you think is just going to be the bad guy, but by the end of it, a complete turnaround. What an interesting story. The emotion and relationship he actually has to these kids that he's been taking care of and responsible for, right? You get that in this graphic novel series, in this manga. You don't get that in the movie, like, whatsoever. Like, there's so many characters that are so rich. There's so many freaking layers. They cut out like 60% probably of the cast for the movie. You know what I'm saying? But they get rid of so many. It's got a tension to it too, right? Like an emotional tension and a narrative tension, because the things that are happening are progressing on such a scale that it's just transfixing to freaking read. And Otomo, I believe, I saw like an interview snippet earlier today where he was talking about how he wanted to kind of take control of the pace of the book, have it be less wordy than you typically would be seeing in manga at that time. And he wanted you to kind of read through it very quickly, but then on certain moments go, holy cow, and stop. And the thing is, you can get lost in this artwork. We'll dive into that. Speaking of diving, Brian tried out for the Olympic diving team back in 1984, and it didn't work out so well. But anyway, you're here today because of it. So what do you think about Akira?
I am here because it didn't work out so well. I can be here to talk about Akira. I absolutely love this manga. Like I said, first time I actually read it all the way through was 5 years ago. I had seen the movie, and after reading the books, I was like, I think we talked about it before coming on. I was a little frustrated with the movie after reading the books because they were so good. And like you said, there's like all these other characters that are totally different than they are in the movie. And, and the Colonel's a great one, right? Because in the movie, he's a warmonger. I mean, he's a stereotypical warmonger. But in this, he's got all this incredible depth, and everything like that. And then like Miyako was hardly used in the movie. I think you just kind of see her as just kind of this, kind of weird, crazy, religious lady.
Yeah, and she dies like when the bridge collapses. Yeah, right. Yeah, and they don't even have what's her name in it. The lady that's protecting Kay throughout.
Kyoko, yeah.
She's badass, bro. She's like
she's my favorite dude.
Oh, yeah, awesome. And then they introduced that one that was with Akira towards the end of the
lady
in the manga.
Kaori.
Yeah, Kaori. They had her thrown in pretty early, but I still rewatching the movie. I still like it because it is still pretty dope animation, and the soundtrack is pretty good. I'm sure we'll probably talk more about the movie later, but yeah, I like that you brought up that about the pacing because we were talking about it a couple months ago. I was telling you like it took me so and so long to read it, and I guess it was 2 to 3 times longer than everybody else was taking, but that's actually normal for me. But part of that is because of the detail you guys are talking about. Like I get stuck half the time if something's hyper detailed, and because I want to see, I'm going to sit there and just stare at the thing for a little while. You don't want
Otomo's assistant's painstaking work with a ruler and a pen to go unnoticed, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And they do a lot of really cool comic techniques like mirroring and stuff like that, like having one character doing something and the other mirrored. There's a lot of like really cool comic book tricks that only work in comics.
Yeah.
In there. So I always love those types of aspects to it. And the story is just, it's, while it is deep and layered and everything, it has some of the best action in comics. It's just like it just keeps pounding at you in certain points and everything like that. I don't know. I could go on and on.
Yeah, we can ramble. We can all ramble on about this. So this is what we're doing tonight, y'all. We're going to ramble and tell you how much you need to read this book. If you've never read it, highly recommend that you do. It's one of those ones, like we always, talk about, like, say, Mouse, Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, you hear those words, right? Akira is one of them, right?
Yeah, this is in that group.
Honestly. Yeah, this is one of
Absolutely.
those. This is one of the absolute best of all time. Speaking of best of all time, Brooks, one of my besties. What do you think about this book? I know that you're a huge fan, so I had to have you on when we revisited this. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I remember, like, I read Akira first. They had the nice hardcover color editions in the Huntsville Public Library.
Yep.
But they only had 3 volumes. There was 1, 2, and 5, I think. So I'd read those 3 volumes, which is like very confusing because a lot happens between volumes 2 and 5.
Yeah.
And so I'd read volume 5 and like, I don't know what's going on, but I kept reading it anyway.
A lot of us locally have that story because Akira, they had those at the library and then they disappeared, and apparently somebody stole them one day. Just took them and never brought them back, man.
Yeah, it sucks. So I would have loved to have read them all in the nice color. I remember the color ones looking really nice too. I bet they're expensive as hell now, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
the trades I have, of course, have like the first few pages in color, which we'll talk more about when we get to the artwork.
The Dark Horse ones have like a few color pages in them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was Marvel Marvel with Epic that brought in the colorist, and they brought in, it was Steve Oliff to do the colors, and they were all fully colored when they printed them that way.
Yeah, a lot of people. That's those Epic editions, because this was, by the way, a little bit of history. This was the first manga fully translated into English, and Marvel Epic, in their Epic line, produced this, and really cool stuff. I mean, truly made sense with the word epic, right? But Brooks, overall, what do you think about it, man? What's your experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, I loved the books back when I was a kid. Like that's why I was so disappointed that I could never find those other ones. Like I wanted to finish the story so bad and fill in the gaps, but I wouldn't be able to until later, when the Dark Horse ones came out. I remember I bought them from Rocket City Collectibles back in the day. But yeah, like Akira, like the thing that really gets me about Akira is it feels like kind of a futuristic world, but not so futuristic that you couldn't conceive living into it. Like I could conceive actually living in a world in the the state that Akira is in, even the kind of the craziness with the powered children or whatever. But technology wise, it seems pretty not too far off from our future in a lot of ways. Like even the crazy shit like the space laser and the fucking hover gun vehicles and shit. It seemed like something that we could conceivably see within our lifetimes. But it's just futuristic enough so it's the future.
Yeah. I mean, what was it set in 2030 or something like that?
Yeah.
So we're almost there.
And it's kind of like that. You're supposed to have the impression that Japan is kind of since the catastrophe, they're financially probably not doing as well as they would have.
Yeah.
There's a lot of problems, a lot of crime. Everything looks a little worn out. Kind of junky, but not, it's that kind of cyberpunk look, from Blade Runner or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was serialized in Youth Magazine, Weekly Young Magazine. That was the name of the magazine, from December 1982 to June 1990. And of course, it now consists of 6 volumes that were redone. So there was some stuff added to make the page count, to make the double page spreads work better. And just when Otomo put it together in those graphic novels, he kind of did like a Daniel Clowes, and he redid some stuff. And so it doesn't read like it's chunky, and just episodic like that. It is one big giant story, and it's a page turner. I didn't read a single one of these volumes not in one sitting. You get what I'm saying? I sit down, you open it up, 45 minutes to an hour later, you're done. Or in Brian's case, 2 to 3 hours later. Depends, because I found myself getting hypnotized and mesmerized by that artwork as well. But it's also about that rich story, so let's talk about it. The world building. right? It gives you this setting of Neo Tokyo, years after a bomb has exploded there, right? They're trying to get things back together. Tokyo has the Olympics on the horizon. They're building this new stadium. But at the same time, there's this entity named Akira that's the military has, and they're trying to basically weaponize humans. You got some MK Ultra Firestarter type things going on there, right? And you got these biker gangs, right? And Tetsuo and Canada. Yeah, Canada. And it's always Canada to me for some reason. They do the names all wrong. Anyway, it doesn't matter if we pronounce things right or whatever here. You know what we're talking about. But they're out there, they're biker gangs, all that kind of stuff. They're building you up into this world. They're giving you a little bit of information, but you get a whole lot more information just through the actions, through the experience of the world, and some of the exposition bits throughout the entirety of the story. I love it. I think it's amazing. They juggle so many characters around, but they still make it Kanada's and Tetsuo's story at the heart. But especially in the book, characters like the Colonel, characters like Ryu, who has that whole thing with the American soldier that's not in the movie, but it's freaking phenomenal. Kay and her homie, what's her name again?
Kyoko.
Brooks? Yeah, like all of that. The kids, like these relationships. It's all about connection. It's about connecting in an isolating age. I stole that from Rent. Jonathan Larson, Station, R.I.P. Anyway, what do you think about the story overall? Because I think the characterizations, I think the world building, I think the pacing, everything about this just slaps. Speaking of slapping, what do you think, Manny?
The story. I love these kind of futuristic tales that Brooks was saying, it's not too far fetched. It's still grounded in some semblance of reality. I think that as far as the world building of Neo Tokyo, I think that Otomo can he can craft a world rebuilding itself from the ashes of tragedy, probably because he lived in a reconstructionist type of period, right? So yes. He understands how that works, how that impacts being a youth in that culture, how it impacts, the economics, the politics. It's got this real lived in and intangible world that Neo Tokyo is and the artwork helps to sell that as well, because it feels lived in. The story itself, Tetsuo and Canada, like Canada, that guy. Again, like you said, it's like they're the core of the story, yet while they're always the core of that story, like the driving point of the narrative, the story can sprawl in with all these other characters in this world and not lose it never loses direction. It never gets off the track. It reminds me of like Les Mis in that, right? Like it's Jean Valjean and Russell Crowe, and they've got their story, but then there's like a revolution happening around them with other characters. I feel like you got that same thing with Akira. Like there is this heart of the story, yet all this other craziness is going around it, but you never lose sight of the overall narrative. I cannot say enough about how cool this story is, not just on a human level, but also you got the supernatural elements, the psychic elements, the sci-fi elements, everything working like a well-oiled machine. Yeah. I like I said, I can't say enough good things about it. It's expert.
Building up like a perfect, like going to the most profound orchestra and symphony out there, building up to crescendos, giant freaking conclusions, climaxes, coming back down, building back up again. It's amazing. It's a symphony of comics. It's a symphony of telling story through artwork, right? Yeah. And there's like all of volume 4, I think it is, like Kanada's not even in it.
Yeah.
Right?
Tetsuo's gone throughout the 3rd book.
Yeah, like
Tetsuo's hardly in the 3rd book, and then Kaneda's gone throughout most of the 4th book.
Yeah, just like Akira's gone throughout the movie. Yeah, but really, really strong points there, man. What about you, Brian? What do you think about the story overall, my man?
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to bring that up too, because like with Kaneda, being a focus and everything like that, and it was funny because I'd already read these books, watched the movie, whatever, but I still it was still a gut punch when the apocalypse thing happened and he was gone. I mean, I knew he was coming back, but it still hit me the same way it did that first time. And yeah, it's, you guys have already hit really good points about the structure and everything like that. And the story, it's compelling all the way through. And there's just, and it is definitely relatable because, these apocalyptic events similar, did happen to, Japan in 1945, so, they you can see evidence of that in a lot of the artwork and stories, and everything. So, but one thing that I thought, grounded it for, in ways it was the biker gang thing. The bikes looked somewhat futuristic, but they still just looked like tricked out bikes. Right. And we have biker gangs and everything like that. And that, their structure is the same as biker gang structures, and everything like that. And that was one thing I liked about the book too, is like actually when they would go to their hideout, the bar and everything like that. Cause in the movie that was like 2 minutes, and then, but in this, like that was actually a functioning part of the story, was this, the interactions of that bar. And I thought that was really cool. I
was going to say, and the pills, right? We haven't even mentioned that. Like the pills are such a big deal. And I think I was watching a little bit of a Cartoonist Kayfabe video earlier, but I didn't watch the whole thing because I was like, let me watch their Akira video. I mean, they have multiple Akira videos, man. They did like a video on each volume. I was like, damn, we could have done that, right? But they mentioned that that's the MacGuffin, that's the Maltese Falcon, and the beginning of the story. You think that these capsules have so much importance, but it's more of just, it's making a statement about certain things, about addiction, about how easily populaces could be controlled, say if they're addicted to a certain substance that's maybe put in their grimy oatmeal or whatever the hell they're eating. It's like from the Matrix, whatever the hell they're eating, right? Yeah. But then it's an important factor, but that immediately entices you. It's a cool image, like that jacket. Everybody wants that damn jacket. You know what I'm saying? And then the way it builds up and into all levels of society, and then how little of a factor it is. But like another thing I love about the book, aside from the movie, is that Tetsuo kicks his addiction in the book. And that's when he gets really freaking scary.
Based on, after meeting, after talking to Miyako, right? That's when he actually decides to, try all that, and he kicks it, and it's really cool. And they do the stuff with the moon and the space laser. It's got so many cool elements to it. And I mean, it's just one of the best science fiction tales I've read. I mean, I don't know.
By the way, Dan Slott, if you want to do something to the moon to make it have weight to your story, this is how you do it. Because he just took a piece of the moon out and it fucked everything up. You know what I'm saying? Like floods and shit, bro. It just happened in Fantastic Four, and Reed's like, it's fine. No, bro, it's not.
But the art of that part, I know we're going to get into the art in there, but that art of that part was like, I think my mouth was open the whole time I was looking at that.
Exactly. Those are those moments that he's trying to put in there, right? He wants you to breeze through this. And we typically think of manga as a breezy experience. I think this is the watershed moment that people are following from that point forward, right? Mm-hmm. And people do it nowadays they're using less dialogue. They're also using less panels per page in a lot of manga, right? That's not what's going down here in Akira. Like there's a lot of information per page, but it's crafted in such a way through I don't think there was a script for this, but you get what I'm saying. Like through the writing, through the pacing, through the storytelling, just freaking flows you right through that, man. And then you hit those moments. And then I'm sitting there lingering on these double splash pages of the moon cracking and getting pieces ripped out of it. And you're just transfixed, brother.
Yeah.
I thought you had something else to say. Speaking of transfixing, Brooks, what do you think about the story, my man?
Well, I mean, like, it's one of the best, man. Like, it's such Akira's like, it's like, it's like a quilt interwoven of like different stories from different characters. Because I think like overall the story is more about, like what people do when, when the worst happens, and like, how will they react to that, So you have like all these different characters from different stations. Like, you have your military guy and the colonel. You got your disenfranchised youth in Kaneda and Yamagata and all those the biker guys. You have, the revolutionaries like Kei and Ryu. And, and you also have these weird these children that were basically kind of like abused by the state in a way, just to, to satisfy scientific curiosity or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like the stories about, how power can like so quickly like, shift in ways that like just really, fucks with people's lives. And I think that's what Akira is like. Akira is like just the power unleashed without any, motivation. Like that's the reason like he does so little is because he has nothing. He doesn't care about anything. He's like the personification of the power that these kids, use, that like their special powers and gifts or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that was one thing I thought was cool when I read it this time that I don't think I picked up on before, but they said that like exercising that power eventually it slowly disintegrates your personality. So that's why
like Akira has no personality until the very end. Yeah. Where he somehow he gets his personality back for just a little bit.
Yeah. It's like he's a shell, right?
Yeah. It's like Akira is like if God was real, like what he would be like, he just like probably wouldn't care. He just like, he's so
telling me that this song directly
so far ahead that, what's in the moment doesn't even matter.
You tell me this song directly inspired Joan Osborne's song, What If God Was One of Us?
Of course.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about
it here.
We'll be talking about its influence on the medium, of course, as later on. But like, for instance, look at Stranger Things. Look at what's his name, Papa or whatever, but the Matthew Modine character in 11.
Yeah.
Look at Kyoko and the Colonel. Like that's what they're doing here, and that's why like there's such a disservice to certain characters done in the movie. The movie, don't get us wrong, the movie's fucking brilliant, one of the best animated films of all time. Great soundtrack, great visuals, but it really condenses the hell out of this story. You know what I'm saying?
I can see the movie like a retelling more than like an adaptation.
Yeah, and obviously it wasn't done yet. You know what I'm saying? And you can tell that. You can tell that where they had gotten. You mentioned like it was at the end of book 3 or something when they were starting to make the movie, because that's a long process, right? And the movie is gorgeous. Like animated films today could learn a lot from that. Brian's got some kind of weird stretching he's about to do. What's going on here?
No, I'm just getting it ready for later.
Oh yeah, just getting my weird stretch ready for later. Yeah. Oh hell yeah!
He's stretching for his weird stretch.
Hell yeah,
that's right.
The story does really fantastic things though with its characters, with the complexity of those relationships. A trick in writing, especially if you're doing something long form and episodic, is take two characters that you don't see work together very often and put them together and see what happens, right? You see this in Sopranos. There are whole episodes where two characters that rarely get screen time together go off on their own, and you find new dynamics and things going on. You can see this kind of stuff in Buffy. You can see this stuff in Lost. Can you tell that I haven't really invested in TV since the 90s, but in early 2000s? But they do that here, right? Where like when the Colonel and Kay have their like trek and they're going off, and at the end she like thanks him, right? I know I keep going on the Colonel because this is one of my favorite characters in the damn book.
The Colonel has like the best arc.
He's awesome.
Yeah. It's such a freaking powerful arc, man. You find out how much he cares. At first, you think he's just going to be, the prototypical villain, hard ass kind of thing, but that is not what happens. And if your only experience with this story is the movie, I highly encourage you to check out this book. Also, because as great as this movie looks, there are not many comic books, I think, that look as good as this one. It is unfair what Otomo has done, right? Like nobody else can match this. This is absolutely brilliant artwork. I think it's amazing. They did this at a frantic pace, right? Like they met the deadlines. I heard like usually 2 hours before they had to, right? Like it was that much. Initially, Otomo had one assistant. So he would do the rough kind of outlines and sketches, and then he would start working in on the foreground figures. His assistant with a ruler and the pen would go in and do all the backgrounds and mark it all off. But he would lay it all out, right? Eventually, he had to get another assistant. At one point, towards the end of production of this, he had to bring in a separate assistant just to handle the screen tone. And that's the other thing. You'll get lost in pages of this just trying to figure out what the hell the complexity of the screen tone used and how it adds depth and dimension. we talk about Steve Oliff doing the coloring for Marvel Epic, right? And as cool as that coloring is, and it is, it ain't nothing like it's in black and white. Like, you get so many more layers, I think. The color is cool, but you lose something. You lose a texture, a complexity that is there, that screen tone, that very, very fine background detail work with the pen. Freaking phenomenal. Expressive characters, consistent characters, cartoony in their expressions at times, but not what you typically think of as a shorthand. There is not a shortcut done. I can't see shortcuts done in this book. It is freaking artistically a damn masterpiece and directly influenced so many people, including the founders of Image. But what do you think about the artwork, Manny? Because there's a lot to unpack here, buddy.
Oh, man. Like I was saying earlier, you can get lost looking at just a panel from this book. I was quick rereading before we went live here. And I mean, just like, I don't know how much you can see on my screens, but I mean, it's Mattress Firm. But just like you said, like, you don't even always know what the hell you're looking at, but it's insanity. I mean, look at the detail just in the debris. Yeah. I see guys just scribbling on comics. It's the only book they're doing this entire month, and they can't get it done. This shit it's mind-boggling. It's so damn good. I never read the black and white, but in the colored versions I have, the colors, the way that it's the light is played with in every shot. It's always consistent. You have consistency in the textures, consistency in the detail, consistency in the character expressions. Like you said, it never gets into that weird, oh my gosh, look at that. Oh my gosh. It never gets into that like weird anime manga, like no one turns into just like a circle with like a raindrop on their head and lose half their face. They still stay expressive and grounded in the world of Akira. Even when they do get cartoony, it's never off the wall. Oh my gosh, look at that. All right. It is so damn good, you guys. I cannot say enough about what is all packed in. And like I said, the consistency just speaks to the amount of love and care that was taken into this story. Otomo like lived and breathed this world while he was doing this. You can just tell he's not thinking about his next title. He's not thinking about, the other creator owned shit he's going to try to put out next week. He's focused on this book, zeroed in. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that looking at this book. Yeah.
And he ain't going for a Netflix deal. You know what I'm saying? But it all worked out.
He already had a movie deal.
Yeah. And it was another funny thing is, when he initially started this, his plan was that it would wrap up in 6 months. It'd be done. He did not expect it or plan for it to be as sprawling of an epic as it is, but I am thankful that it is. So you read like digital versions of the colors, the epic collections or something, right?
Yeah, and yeah. I had physical ones that I borrowed, but yeah, I ended up getting these digital.
That's awesome. The color in that is amazing, and I remember being a kid and really wanting, or younger, and being really wanting the color versions, man. But I would highly encourage you to really look into the some of the black and white ones too, because it's a masterful color job. But you lose so much of that, like the screen tone and stuff kind of gets muddied in it almost a little bit. But it's so crisp and beautiful, and it's amazing. It's like when you read it in black and white, you can't believe that they didn't do this with computers. You know what I'm saying? Like you have computers today, they can't do shit on this level. You know, and he was cranking out like 10 or 20 page chapters every 2 weeks. Like that's insane to me, man. Brian, what do you think about the artwork, man?
Yeah, well, speaking of the page rate, yeah, that's one of the phenomenal things is like this. When this edition, it's 6 hardcover volumes, and it comes with the Akira Club book, which was originally released in '95. And I'll show some other pages from this too. But it actually has a complete timeline of when all the issues came out and how many pages there were.
Nice. And
the shortest is 15, and the longest was like 23 or 24. So that's almost 40 pages a month, right? For this. And I mean, it is a slightly smaller format, I think, but but still, it's just a phenomenal output for the amount of detail that's packed in these things. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if some of these things, like, you know, like the planes and the ships, you know, may have been traced from photographs or something like that. But adding all that screen tone and all that other detail, you know, you can't get that from, you know, tracing and stuff like that. So, I mean, yeah, that was a great point about bringing up the debris, you know, and everything. And I mean, it's amazing, the detail in there. One of the things I did want to bring up in the story is one of my favorite characters was the Joker from the Clown.
Yeah, Joker was great.
Gang. And that was one of the things, and part of it was because his visual design I thought was like super cool, and especially when he got ran over. And so, like, for several pages, he had tire marks on his face. Yeah, you know, and they kept that through, right? And that's hard to do, small, you know. And he looked super cool, but I thought he had an interesting story arc, kind of similar.
See, that's another one of those characters where you think of one thing in the beginning. Oh, the Joker gang, they're the bad guys, and then at the end, he's essential to helping them kind of fight this last battle.
Yeah, and he's far and away the funniest one.
I love when he makes he puts together that hover thing, and it's got it's all clown themed, and they're all like excited first, then they see it and they're like, never mind, you ride it.
Yeah. They're like, I ain't fucking riding that shit, man. You do it.
Yeah. And that's that grounding part, right? I mean, because there's all these epic things going around, and they're sitting there arguing over the, you know, these.
Like him and Kaneda are like, they're always sniping each other. Kaneda's sniping him, and he's just getting pissed off at him.
Yeah.
He's like, I gave you those digs, man.
Capitalist pig at one point.
It's like, I'm poor, man. I need some money for this bike. You wrecked my fucking bike. I'm giving you your clothes. You took my boots. Come on, man. What more do you want from me?
Yeah, he was awesome. He's awesome. And like, I know, you know, Robbie, you mentioned earlier that they changed some of the stuff, like, you know, from, you know, because it was released in a magazine format, and you know, in these trades, and this book, it goes into explaining a fair amount of it. Because one of the coolest things about it is it has like all the original covers with these little notes in there that Otomo put in there, which all the notes are like about like either how sick he's getting, or if he met somebody, you know, about the movie, or, you know, got things coming out. But these are all the covers. I mean, it's just amazing, but none of these are in the collected editions, right?
Yeah, I'm very envious of you, because I saw Cartoonist Kayfabe unpack that one, and I was like, holy cow, I gotta get that.
I was trying to find, there was I wanted to show a couple from here. Sorry, I lost my mark. But like these here, when this is one of my favorite sections of the story, you know, and character designs there. But yeah, so that was part of why he ended up changing like the big epic. Oh yeah, see, I don't know if that one's showing up very well, but that, you know, Tetsuo kind of rebuilding himself and everything.
Okay.
But that was part of why they changed some of the pacing, like during the destruction parts, was because they didn't have the covers in there, which were kind of natural breaks when it came out as a magazine. It made sense that way. And so there's like this 2-page spread showing you, here's like, this is going to be really hard to see on here, but on this side this is the way it showed up in the magazine form, and you can see like there's a couple of covers thrown in there, and then this is the way it ended up being in the collected editions.
Oh wow!
So it's actually quite a bit different from the pacing there. But another thing I wanted to point out from this one is this is one of my favorite panels. I'll get this one up there closer, from the original, from the first time I read it, where Tetsuo is riding the bike and he doesn't have his hands on there, and he's just sitting there all stoic. That's only in the collected editions, because this one here, that was from the magazine, and he wanted to end it. That was the final panel of that one, and he wanted to end it every kind of magazine one with like a flamboyant, like kind of flare finish.
Yeah.
I just found that interesting that, you know, and he kept to that technique, but then in the collected edition, because I honestly like the other version better, because he just looks cooler. You know,
yeah, right.
They're like this, riding on the bike without, you know, I guess he's propelling it himself.
So since you were showing off the box set real quick, just to let everybody know, so that is basically what we have here. These are done by Kodansha now, I think that's how you say it. But these were originally Dark Horse when I got these, and now they're Kodansha. It's the same type thing, but they mirrored the artwork so that we would read it in the normal American way, which, you know, some people don't mind that, but I would love to get a hold of this, because this is done in the original format. So there is no mirroring. You read it right to left, and it keeps that, because there's certain things that, like the human figure, when it's drawn a certain way, if you mirror it, it doesn't always look right. Plus Tetsuo's arm that's all fucked up, is the different arm, right?
Yeah.
So it's not the right arm, it's the left arm in the book that I read, but in the one you read, it was the right arm, right? All that kind of shit. So
Yeah.
always cool, I think, to preserve the original artistic vision. One thing I wanted to ask you, especially since you took some time to really leer into the artwork, I'm looking at it and I'm seeing screen tone, I'm seeing different screen tones, I'm seeing amazing, very precise and refined, like pen and ruler work, but is there duo shade involved in this? Because some of it looks like it should be, especially when some of the cloud ethereal type effects, I don't know if it is. What did you think? Did you pick up anything like that, Brian?
I didn't pick up on that.
Okay.
I mean,
there are moments where
I could see it.
it almost looks like it's because it looks like it's a brush stroke, going across, and like, did they really cut out the screen tone in such a very precise, and maybe they did, because that's how comics were made back those days, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, that speaks to, like, this is not the only manga artist you hear this about, these deadlines and putting all these pages out. Has a, they do all this stuff, but I guarantee they're spending 18, 20 hours a day and, sacrificing their health. I mean, that's what happened with that Berserk creator. They like found his diaries, and he would be talking about how, like, he was sick for like a month, and he said, "Oh, I finally have some time off," and it's like an afternoon. Yeah. I mean, and in some of his notes in there, you can tell that he's going through that same life. He's like, "Oh, I got sick again," and it's like, it's kind of sad. But
so don't complain about hiatuses on our favorite books, y'all. Maybe a 3-year hiatus is not quite the right thing to do. Hint, hint, Brian and Fiona, but whatever. We're happy with what we got. But you got to be able to take these breaks. The consistency is important, but you also, I think, you can plan it in a certain way, and that's why, especially when you're doing like jobber type work at like Big Two, you have fill-in stories. Like on File, they used to do that kind of thing, and it could easily fit in or whatever. Brooks, you're a little bit of an artiste yourself. What do you think about the art in this book, man? I know you got a lot to say.
Oh yeah, I mean, I always love the art in this book, because it, being somebody who was into American comics first, like reading, like, especially like a lot of the Marvel stuff, like the style wasn't too far, into like your typical kind of manga anime style. It has almost an American kind of style to it, very low key, less exaggerated, and like it's like the backgrounds and stuff too, like the way the city looks, like there's so many tiny little details, fucking tubes going everywhere, wires everywhere. So it looks like futuristic shit, but like very sloppily done,
Yeah.
I mean, like the atmosphere in this book is just so good that that's why, I think you really get into this world, is because it just feels like, it feels lived in. It's like you can, like, you could actually see it, you could conceive of, actually walking into a city that looks like this.
Yeah.
And like the characters, too, I think are really great. And especially like, that he has a character like Chiyoko, who's like not your typical, female protagonist type. She's very, she's a big lady. She's obviously like a military type, like ex-military.
She's like, what's her name from fucking Game of Thrones almost? Like, was it?
Yeah.
Brienne of Tarth? Yeah.
Yeah, and like
she's badass, man.
She also has like she's vulnerable too, She gets fucked up and like, she ends up having to get taken care of too. And like, the whole idea of the main hero, Kaneda, is like just some worthless like biker punk guy, like, somebody that like the society is basically given up on. Like, I think that's like the whole first book makes it pretty clear that like Kaneda and all of his friends are like kids that they don't give a shit about, Yeah. Teachers don't care about them. They see them as just lost causes. That just kind of fuels their desire to, do their own thing and say like, well, fuck it. If society doesn't want us, then we'll just make our own society where we fucking, ride our bikes and do what we want.
Yeah.
And I think that comes around at the end too, because like basically they have to like make their own society now, and it's like it's the refuse of society are the ones who are going to end up building a new Japan.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because that's what they do too, right? They're and they do it that at the end. Like I love the ending of this damn book so much more than the ending of the movie. And like I was not intending on spending tonight at all talking about how shitty the movie is compared to the book, but it really is, man. As great as that movie is, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing is it's not the movie shitty, right? It's just the book has so much more that it's like especially if you watch, like a lot of us, I bet, probably watch the movie first, and then read it. You're just kind of like, wow, there's so much here.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so much.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So much to unpack. All right, let's talk about the themes, man. There's a lot of subtext in this book. It's saying a lot, right? And real quick, does anybody ever read any of Otomo's other work? Like, was it Domo? I've never read that, or Fireball. I hear that they're all kind of like, if you read them, they kind of like all influence each other and then build into Akira. And then after that, I mean, I think he did Memories or whatever, but for the most part, he just directed movies from that point forward, right? Didn't he just do like animation or something from that point forward? Anybody know?
Yeah, I don't think he did many things past this one. Like,
yeah,
at least not that I've heard. Like, Domu was the only other one that I'd really ever seen.
Yeah, which was right before this one. So, and then Fireball apparently is one that's worth looking into. So I'm excited to check that one out. But what do you think? And apparently they
movie Memories, by the way, because it was on Prime for a while.
Okay,
that's actually pretty cool.
So apparently, though, in Fireball and Domu, there's a lot of the same thematic material being used, and a lot of it is
the telepathic or telekinetic kid kind of.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And using it as a way to explore. I think Otomo said something like he wanted to explore this period, which you could tell that he was around for, right? But post-war, post-destruction, but in this weird zone of youthful rebellion and the military trying to figure their thing out, and other global influences from other governments and things like that. Like, that's all kind of portrayed here into this hodgepodge of what this is. And the idea that a post-war state is just also a pre-war state, right? Mm-hmm. But what is the way to peace? And what is the way to peace? And maybe there's something else there. What do you think this book is trying to say to you, Manny?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things happening thematically in this book. I do think that there's something to be said about the fact that Kaneda and Tetsuo, their battle is very much a good versus evil, black and white battle, but all the other adult characters in this book are either waging like their own political agendas or their own issues, right? But the adults are like trying to rape the girls and shit. Like, I mean, the adults are operating in this really shifty moral area, but like for the kids, it's black and white. Like, this is their future. This is their fight, right? I think there's something really cool being said about that. Brooks kind of touched on this, and it got me thinking too about God and how like Tetsuo is like a fill-in for like creating a God when it feels like God is not there, right? Like they've gone through this terrible ordeal, right? And with Akira being like he said, like God, I think that's really profound, because it's like, yeah, the moments that shape human history are the moments when religions have decided God cared, right? God cared enough to come down as Jesus, if you're in that Judeo-Christian belief or whatever, like, and then like leaves it to its own devices until he decides to come back again. I mean, that's very much what Akira does here, right? And just like the God of the Judeo-Christian faith just blows the shit up when to fix it and start it over again, right? I mean, I think there's something really cool and profound about that. And when Brooke said that, it totally made me forget everything else I was going to say about what this book is trying to say. The cyclical nature of creation and destruction, right? Yeah, absolutely. And again, with the Tetsuo coming in and becoming this God in a place where God feels like he's not there. There's also all of this all this technology and building the new stadium and making facilitating growing, if you will, these psychic kids, like all of that man-made crap, you know what I mean? Like to fill in, forgot, like, look at what we can build. Look how we can pull ourselves up out of these ashes and we can host the Olympics here. Like
exactly,
just,
right?
There's just something very.
By the way, like building your Olympic stadium over like the chamber of the imprisoned catastrophe causing child, not the greatest idea, I don't think.
No,
but don't worry, he's just a bunch of parts and jars, right?
Yeah. Well, that's again speaking to the pride of the humans in this book, man. They're like, not only is God dead, not only have we relegated him to a bunch of test tubes, we're gonna build and show the greatest achievements of human performance above his corpse. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of stuff there to unpack. So yeah, it's thematically, this book is super rich, and I don't even know if it's as rich as Otomo wanted it to be, but it is. There's so much you can get by looking at this. There's this kinetic thing, like we're hurtling towards this new world, this new creation, like you were talking about, creation and destruction. It's even mirrored in like the motorcycles, dude. Like this whole book has this momentum of hurtling towards either the end game with Tetsuo, or even just in the small moments when they're hurtling towards fighting these rival gangs. And you know, I'm new to comics relatively, and I just read Mazzucchelli and Year One, and I thought, wow, that was the best vehicular shit I've seen in a comic book. No, this trumped that. The way that the art moves when they're riding those bikes and how it feels like it's in motion. Oh my gosh, man. Yeah. But yeah, it's just like the youth are hurtling towards this end game, right? And the adults are struggling to hold on to their structures, their societies, the shit that they're holding tight to, their politics. And the kids are the ones that have to move it forward and get us into the next phase.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Well, two things real quick. First of all, one of the ideas that you had mentioned was the idea of like things would get broken apart to get put back together. In the end game of this whole series, Joker is giving them the vehicles they need. And he mentions they're all pieced together from so many different things, right? It's like hamburger. How many cows made my hamburger? But that's a weird analogy. I don't know why I went that way, but you get what I'm saying. You take the rubble of the failed mistakes of the past and you build something new to blaze ahead into the future. And the other thing too is you were talking about the youth. Yep. Youth culture is very, very fucking important in this book, and I think that's why this book hit the right moment in the zeitgeist when it was coming out and when that movie came out too, because you have this idea that's presented in the book. I am losing my thought right now, and I'm really struggling to bring it back together, but it's about youth, and it's about how I'll just throw it over to Brian right now before I completely lose it. What's up, Brian? What you got? What's
well, I don't know. Is it any deeper than just basically kind of plunging towards writing a laser satellite?
I mean, that's pretty dope. I remember what I was going to say recently, are the situation involving the Ukraine, right? Those of us our age, we have pause for concern, but we've also seen a lot of these kind of big time events or whatever. And so to a lot of us, we're just kind of riding this thing, like being like, it's not going to be as it's not going to be as bad as we're all worried or paranoid it will be. Let's just hope that it resolves itself and blah, blah, blah. I found out in the last few days, some of the people that work for me, like that are in their early 20s or not even at 20 yet, they're worried they're going to get drafted. They're worried that they're going to have to be sent over to war. And I'm like, that's a ridiculous thought. You guys are fine. Well, it's not to them. Yeah. Do you get what I'm saying? And so when you're left in the devastation of Neo Tokyo, especially after Akira bombs that first fucking time, dude, there's 3 fucking phenomena that happen in here. Like the movie doesn't touch on that, right? Yeah. Like, because there's the whole Neo Tokyo, then there's the post-event Neo Tokyo, where after the whole Akira explosion, and then Akira is throned as God, and Tetsuo is basically his false prophet, is Moses, his Jesus figure, right? Like, that's a whole other kind of thing. But what does it feel like to be youth in a world? Like, I remember being in my early 20s during the Iraq invasion, 9/11. Yeah. People were telling me, I don't know, that was something unprecedented. It felt like, but I understand, like, youth, the way they respond to the shit that they get thrown at, like, it can be very inspiring. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going at with this right now. So Brian, just take over.
No, I think I understand what your point is about how youth responds to these catastrophic events is different than the older generation will. It's
almost like we allow it to happen because we're like, you know what? It will resolve itself. Don't worry about it. We've been through this before.
You've been through a cycle or two, right? You know that, it won't be the same afterwards, but it's going to be different.
Yeah.
It's not, it's different than what's happening right now. Right. Cause I can totally relate to that. Cause I was 18 or 19 when Desert Storm hit, which we hadn't had a military conflict longer than 3 days since Vietnam, when I was growing up. And I remember we were all everybody was talking about, I was like, well, what happens if they have a draft, and I mean, circumstances are a lot different than, Vietnam and World War II. The Army is actually fairly decent size. I would not expect a draft anytime soon.
Me neither. But I remember the same thought, like during the 9/11.
Post 9/11, we were like, damn, are we gonna get drafted? But I think the patriotic fervor brought on by 9/11 kind of gave him more than enough recruits, most likely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember Brooks having
surge.
discussions, man. I was like, well, conscientious objector, does that shit work? Does that really fly? Because
yes and no.
It can be more hopeless to someone younger.
I signed that draft agreement under duress.
But it's that hopelessness of the situation that causes and affects that change, I think, is what I'm trying to say, I guess, through youth. Yeah. Anyway, Brian, you finally have you can have your say. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, So, the themes, the cycle of, death and destruction and rebirth and all those things, to me is pretty much the main theme of it from a macro scale. And then, at an individual level, a lot of it's kind of hero journey type stuff. They start at one place and then, like Kaneda even gets the weapon, right? At one point he got the laser gun and you think that's going to help him, do that stuff. And then the weapons kind of keep escalating and everything.
I love how every time they get a new weapon, he's like, I'm going to go kick Tetsuo's ass. I was like, have you not been fucking paying attention?
Kaneda is like, he's not a good leader. The only reason he's the leader of these guys is because he's so loyal, devoted to him. He feels like the kind of guy who would like jump in the line of fire for any of them. That's the only reason they follow him, because he's not smart.
No, it's inspiration, right?
He's always losing his shit, flying off the handle. I think Yamagata was actually a better leader of the gang than Kaneda was.
Yeah.
He seemed like more together.
Yeah. Kaneda was more inspiring, right? As opposed to like
he was the guy who would take the bullying for you on the playground. He
had the cooler jacket, man. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's like the jacket.
And the cool bike.
Like, sorry, dude. That's
our leader. He had the coolest bike.
If you want one, steal it for yourself.
Yep. Yeah.
He's probably the most static character in the story. Kaneda doesn't have that much. His arc is tied to what's happening with Tetsuo. You know what I mean? Like he's not really, he doesn't really have much other.
Even when Kay hits the point where she's like, it's all or nothing. I think I might die tomorrow. Let's have sex. And he's all like, what's going on?
What? Yeah. And then he runs off to fight Tetsuo.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. But yeah, and I know occasionally, we talk about government and stuff like this. That was one thing I thought in this was like, the way they portrayed the way government works is we see this a lot now, right? I mean, the colonel's in there in a meeting with the board people and they're all like, this isn't really that big of a deal. They're brushing everything off, because dealing with it means going counter to what they're trying to do. Right. And
I'm more concerned about the Olympics, right?
Yeah. Right. Usually finances and, things like that. And so I did appreciate that aspect of it. I liked how, it's kind of like, because as I was reading those scenes, I was like, hey, that's like today. That hasn't changed either. So, but yeah, it's, just the, that cycle of destruction and rebirth is pretty, pretty deep in Japanese culture. Because, I did bring up 1945, but that goes way back because they have tsunamis, fires, earthquakes. They're in a pretty volatile region. So that's a pretty common, theme for that region. Because I remember reading stuff about their culture and that like their houses were made out of wood and paper purposely because they weren't meant to last that long.
Yeah. So you
could just easily rebuild it when you had a fire or, any of these other things. So yeah, but this is for exploring those themes of destruction and rebirth, you're not going to find much better than the way Otomo handled this in this. I mean, it's pretty masterful because it goes. It's not just one cycle. Too.
Yeah.
I mean, you just keep kind of seeing it, and there's different elements in there. So, yeah, it's that was what I got theme wise out of it.
Absolutely. What about you, Brooks? What do you think this book's trying to say?
Well, I mean, it's about, I think it's about the human spirit, how despite like even if through the worst, like in the end, humanity will find its way. Like there's going to be like problems, even like the whole rift between Tetsuo and the rest of the world, and Kaneda, and even like between Japan after the second Akira event and the rest of the world, like America is starting to swoop in now. Like the UN is taking notice. They're starting to send people in. They got this boat full of scientists to try and suss out what's going on. It's like, but even after like all of this hardship, in the end, they do find their way. And they're like, hey, you guys need, who are trying to come in here and like take advantage of us while we're vulnerable, you need to fuck off. And I think that's great, because that people, they want to take care of their own, and they don't, and like you can see through the whole kind of imperialism, that might be going on otherwise.
Yeah, it's a bit anti-authority, isn't it, Brooks?
A little bit. A
A
lot of things are, for some reason. I don't know.
Especially when it involves youth culture, all right? And
especially like the Japanese like biker punk culture. Like there is a guy with a pompadour in this, isn't it? Like Tetsuo's
dude, yeah, the guy who kills what's her name that really sends Tetsuo off the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
which is different in the movie because he kind of kills her himself when he does his and that's the other thing, dude. The body horror in this shit, like holy freaking cow, man!
Yeah.
Like in the book, like I know it sounds like a broken record, but if all you've seen is the movie, you got to read this book because it explores all this even more. You all touched on everything, all the cornerstones of what this series is about. It's about a post-war society. Right? It's about reflecting on that, what that does to youth culture. And it leads to insurrection. It leads to revolution. It leads to new ideas. It also leads to just wasting away, right? So as much as we can applaud the youth in this book for leading the revolution like Kei and eventually Kaneda, who like get involved in everything, right? But how many of these youth were just content to eat their slop, take their pills, and sit there in the stadium and get destroyed through the breads and circuses, right? So you got that. You got the political corruption, the ineptitude of governmental systems, especially in times of legitimate fucking crisis, because all they're set up to do, these governments, right? All they're set up to do is keep what they have.
Maintain.
That's all they're set up to do, right? They're at the maintenance level.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
And Tetsuo actually do very little. Even after they get power, like they don't really do much aside from like the spectacle, of Tetsuo blowing up the moon to, basically show everybody, how powerful they are.
Exactly.
Mostly it's the second in command guy who's doing most of the actual governance, it seems.
And that's because they're trying to overthrow someone who's just there trying to maintain their status quo and power, right? Mm-hmm. And then with the political corruption, with the ineptitude of governments, you have the collapse of society. You have the controlling of society through drugs, through media, through other methods of control, including the military-industrial complex. Like one of my favorite moments in this book is when they're like, bruh, sorry, Colonel, you're out. We took a vote. He's like, shoot this motherfucker. Yep. He's just like, shoot this dude. You think I'm going to let these fucking inept bureaucratic fools fucking take control of this country and this dire, like you don't understand, right? But there's nuance to that character that you find out later on. Overall, though, what it is, the death and rebirth that Akira like throws out there, like he absorbs Tetsuo's influence, right? He absorbs all that by the end, and he basically creates New Jerusalem, if you want to go back to the Judeo-Christianity kind of thing, right? Like the Book of Revelation, like that's what's happened at the end. He recreates. It's no longer Neo Tokyo, it's Neo Tokyo, and he's bringing all that destruction back, because in the whole second half of this book, all you see is destruction, right? And the idea that they are living in the midst of filth, destruction, and poverty, and they're acting like they're not. They're acting like they're creating something new, something different, right? But what it really is all about, why Akira recreates everything at the end, is because the whole book to me is about isolation and connection. Those two forces. Akira's been isolated because he's considered a threat. Youth are isolated from society. We think we're protecting the youth of society, right? Oh, well, they don't know. Yeah, they don't know the complexities of the geopolitical situation in the Ukraine and Crimea and all that. They don't understand this. We got to protect them. Just don't worry about it. Play your video games, watch your TikTok videos, all that kind of. Don't worry about it. And then when they start getting glimpses of it, no wonder they fucking freak out, because they're not brought into it. We're isolating them, right?
And Tetsuo was isolated too. He was. I think all of Kaneda's gang were like kids who just felt like they didn't have anybody.
That's the whole point. All these kids, all these people, they're starting isolate. Even the colonel, even the fucking the psychic kids and Akira's MK Ultra program, whatever the fuck it is. Like, what did they call it? They called it something. I don't remember what it was.
I can't remember either.
They picked a project name for it. Remember, that was like they're more concerned with what's the name of this project, rather than dealing with the actual situation, which all comes from isolation, whether it's isolation of nations, isolation of people, isolation of a culture, isolation of a sect of humanity, of a type of person, right? It's connection. We got to have that connection, and that's what makes everything work at the end. Akira is supposed to be the villain. No, you connect to him. That gives us the hopeful ending, right? Tetsuo, the whole thing with him and Kaneda, like it's connection that brings them together. He starts experiencing.
He wants to get out from under his shadow.
Yeah, right. But then they start understanding. Well, then Kaneda starts understanding what Tetsuo's actually gone through, right? And in the isolation that, we all feel that. We all feel alone. And that's why we care so much about this connection that we have. That's why we do these YouTube videos. That's why I got Manny and Brian and Brooks here, because otherwise I'm just some isolated fool. And what does that lead to? Nothing, man. It's about connection. It's about sharing ideas. It's about bringing these things to the forefront. It's about chatting with you out there in the community. That's why society exists, is to be connected. But more and more, the people that are in power of society want to isolate us, distract us, and then that doesn't do anything good, because that leads to the opposite of progression. Do you get what I'm saying? And when you're dealing with the dregs of society and the shit that's falling to the bottom, you have no other reaction but what the youth do in this book, which is to act out, which is to pop a pill and try to fucking forget about it.
Carve out their space, right?
Carve out your space, find your identity. That's another thing. I think the body horror aspect of Tetsuo is a visual representation of some of the themes of identity that are going on here. You have different characters that connect with each other that you would never foresee at the beginning of this book, and most stories today would not do that. And the fact that they do that in this book shows the power of it. So to me, it's about connection as the antithesis of isolation, right? Like community. And that's what they're trying to build. There's a right way to do it. There's a wrong way to do it. There's a reactionary way to do it, and there's a way to do it. Honestly, at the end, they're not really thinking too far ahead, but they're trying to do something new. Yeah. And that's the important thing, right? I don't know. Yeah. What do you out there in the chat think this whole thing is about? Let's talk about the legacy of the book right now. How has this influenced pop culture and comics since? What do you think, Manny?
Two books you've gifted me in PCP mystery boxes in the past. Ascender, Descender. I see like all kinds of touchstones of this, and just like in general, like so what is cyberpunk if not what we saw in Akira? Like this is obviously like it's such an influential world that's been built in a look, and it's permeated all of that, right? I think that anybody who sees this for the first time, is gonna obviously, like, light bulbs are gonna go off. Like, oh, that's where these things come from.
Yeah.
Shit, even before I'd ever read Akira, even before I ever thought about getting into the hobby of comic books or manga or any of that, I always assumed that Tetsuo was named Akira because I knew that character. Like, he was recognizable right away.
Yeah.
So like I figured, oh, that's Akira. So it's definitely something that's permeated the entire culture.
Absolutely. Plus, we get that Rick and Morty episode with the whole Akira incest baby, right? Or whatever. What about you, Brian? How has this work influenced pop culture?
I think it's had a massive influence on pop culture because it's probably most American comic book fans that have read manga have read this, and sometimes only this. Because it's, to me, it's the one that kicked the door open in the 80s. I'm sure you had plenty of people reading manga in the States. I mean, obviously Frank Miller did in the 70s, right? I mean, because he's the one that kind of brought in like Ronin, and then brought in all those elements into Daredevil, and then but from my perspective, this is it was my first experience with any of the Japanese manga or anime. And obviously, I said earlier, it was through the film. Ghost in the Shell kind of came out after that, and I read that, and stuff like that. But it's one of the most popular manga around, and I think it, like I said, I think it kicked the door open for a wider audience.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's you still have people that love it today, and because that was one interesting thing I thought about it is I could tell that this was made in the 80s in a way, but at the same time, it's just the story is just as relevant today as it was in the 80s. I mean, and part of what I say about the 80s is because in Western culture, the 80s were kind of a dark time, especially artistically, right? I mean, this is when you had like Watchmen come out, Dark Knight, you had the late 70s like kicking off things like Death Wish and all these kind of revenge fantasy type things. You had Reagan's era, Thatcher's era, but also apparently it's over in Japan you had this kind of stuff going on, because this is pretty dark, it's pretty deep, so it's like I thought it was like, which I think lent itself well to kicking the door open at the time it did, right? I think it fit in with the kind of the other things. But also at a personal level, a lot of my friends in high school, we all loved this movie, and one of my friends like loved riding bikes because of it. Sadly, he's not with us today because of it. And I remember when he passed, we all broke out our Akira soundtracks and listened to him, and because he like it was that was the best way we'd come up with to tribute him. And I don't know, it's just a powerful work. I mean, and I mean, you can still get these editions today. That's how powerful it is. I mean,
that edition right there, by the way, if you see it available on Amazon or something, snatch it up because it goes out of stock so often, and it pisses me off.
Yeah, that's the fourth printing, and that happened to me. Like, I saw it one day, and I was just about to buy it, and I was like, I'll get it the next day, and I checked, and it was $400.
Yeah, so. But that's the edition I want right there, man.
There's one of those at one of the shops that I visit for Aftershock, and I'm waiting for one of the days when like my wife has done something really bad or something, so that when we're there, I can be like, gosh, I really want this book, and then she can go, you know what, honey, go ahead. That's what I'm hoping. Yeah.
Either that, or you're hoping that one day it falls off the shelf, gets dinged up, and you get it for 50% off, right?
Well, you were talking about the jacket. It comes with the patch on the back of the jacket.
That's cool.
So, little neat thing in there, but yeah,
pretty spectacular. Speaking of spectacular, Spider-Man spectacular. And sometimes Brooks reads Spider-Man comics. So Brooks, what do you think about the influence of Akira on pop culture?
Well, I mean, it's obviously, kind of opened a lot of doors in the kind of dystopian story, that's become pretty standard you know, throughout time. Like I think like people find like the easiest way to think of like a dramatic situation is, what if the world ended? You know, what would happen then? Or like, what if we were faced with like something so like overpowered and like ridiculous that there was just nothing we could do about it? Like all we could do is just, you know, ride the tide. And, you know, that's basically what this story is. It's like, what can you do, you know, when God is right there in front of you, or something with godlike powers? Like, what can you do? Will you fight? Will you try and fight back, even knowing you may lose? Or do you submit and, you know, hope for the best?
Yeah.
But this is kind of like, you know, that's the core of like the whole kind of dystopian drama, is like, how does humanity react? How do we go into like Mad Max style, like decline of civilization, like, you know, everybody just is out for themselves and it just is murderous, or do we like have a more hopeful look, like, you know, that we may have a rocky start, but eventually everybody will, you know, work in the best interests and, you know, rebuild society without, you know, repeating the same mistakes that led to its downfall in the first place.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, it's an important piece of work, I think. And
Yeah,
I think Lord Akira agrees with me.
There you go.
You must belong
Nice.
to me, Brooks.
Oh, that's the kid from the very end of the movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Akira's obviously has an enduring legacy. We're here today talking about it. It introduced an entire generation of American readers to manga. It introduced an entire generation of Americans to anime, right? It was one of the core focal points of the beginning of cyberpunk. You know, a lot of people like to credit Neuromancer, right? That was 1984. So in 1982, we got Blade Runner, and we got the starting of the publication of Akira. All this stuff led into that, right? Freaking very monumental work, right? It directly influenced certain manga creators, the creators of, Great Teacher Onozaka, the creators of Ghost in the Shell, Battle Angel Alita, Cowboy Bebop, Fist of the North Star, Naruto. Quote Otomo as a direct influence on their work. It directed influence towards Western creators. The Image Dudes were all about this shit. So much to the point that Todd McFarlane swiped backgrounds from Akira for some of his Spider-Man work. Why? Because it fucking works. Being able to tell a story that's meant to be quick and big and boisterous, right? You take Kirby, you take Otomo, you put it together, and guess what you fucking get? In a weird world, you get Image in the 90s, and that's a fun thing that I really like. But just the influence on manga, too, on comic book pacing, on Frank Miller, right? Like, Frank Miller is one of the biggest guys who brought that manga influence into American comics, particularly with Ronin, which I think is a goddamn classic. We got to definitely unpack that here on a Comics Revisited. 100%, right? So, introducing manga to an American audience, introducing dynamic storytelling and a layered, dense character work to an American comic book audience and to the creators. It directly influenced Frank Miller, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Eric Larson, all these people. Like, it all winds up into one big pot. Like, Otomo is as important as Jack Kirby, Will Eisner, Alex Toth, Bernie Wrightson, Neil Adams, John Buscema, Steve Ditko. You get what I'm saying? Like, it is one of these kind of works. It's monumental. When we talk about the greatest comics of the 80s, and I'll be honest, I can make a strong argument that the 1980s were the absolute best decades for comics, period. Right? Like, that's a real argument that you could have. That being said, the 60s were pretty dope too, obviously. I'm just saying the 80s had some monumental, influential work. Akira is one of them for sure. Out of 5 possible you digs, in the comments below, let us know what you give the entirety of the Akira saga. And Manny, kick it off. What do you give it? How do you rate it?
Ooh. God, I'm going to be a broken record on this, but luckily no one keeps score. I'm giving this a 5 you digs. I don't know that I've read something this long that has kept me so damn enthralled the entire time. The last two, issue 37 and 38 in the ones that I read, there's like hardly any action in them. It's like 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's just like kind of wandering around, and it's like with Kaneda, and then it's the end, and they're telling the rest of the soldiers to screw off. I like still couldn't stop. I was hanging on every word, and when that ended, I was like, no, give me more of that. I don't even care if there's no Tetsuo. Give me more of that. So five you digs all day long.
Hell yeah, man. 5 you digs. Perfect score from Manny. What about you, Brian?
It's an easy 5. I can't think of a thing to nitpick about it.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of a single thing to nitpick about it because, we read, you hear people talk about how, I can read a comic as long as the story's good. The art doesn't have to be that great, or, the story doesn't have to be that great if the art's great. And I'm not saying I haven't experienced that to a certain degree, but typically I want both. And I mean, that's why I'm reading them, right? I expect the writer to, deliver a solid, awesome, engaging story, and I expect the art to help tell that story, and give me the reason why I read comics. And this is one of, this is a perfect example of it. It's got a great story, really sprawling story. You don't get lost. It's not so sprawling with a bunch of, weird tangential things that don't make, that don't go anywhere.
Yeah, like Benicio del Toro doesn't show up and take him to a casino planet. Yes, things like that. Yeah. So I can't think of a thing to nitpick about it. It's solid story, solid art, I think classic can be an overused term, but I don't think it is for this. Yeah, and it's no wasted space, right? No wasted space at all. Speaking of wasted space, Brooks, you're not wasted space either, my friend. You're worth it. What do you give Akira out of 5 possible you digs?
I'll give it a 4.5 because it was too good.
All right, Delaney.
I'm kidding.
You don't think the romance is well developed?
Yeah, I don't believe the Kaneda K romance. It wasn't very genuine to me. But yeah, this movie, this is an obvious 5. It's one of the all-time greats. Reading it from beginning to end, I never felt, like it was lagging or dragging. I was always invested. All the characters, I like all the characters except the ones I'm not supposed to like. And it's just a good read.
Absolutely. I'm not going to break the trend here. I'm going 5 you digs as well. I started this whole thing off by calling this a masterpiece. And I believe that 100%. This is a comic book masterpiece. There are some really good works that go on too long. They meander around. As much as I say love Usagi Yojimbo, can you say that every single bit of it is that's a different thing because that's more episodic. But what I'm trying to get to is, like Manny was saying, something so long that's so fucking engaging, right? That has no wasted space, that has a legacy, that's so influential. This book's freaking amazing. The comic book art doesn't get done like this anymore, and the writing doesn't get done like this anymore. There are semblances of it, but the way it works together, holy freaking cow. I'm not trying to say that anybody should be killing themselves by pumping out content like this, but we need more Akiras in this world. Okay? This shit is a goddamn masterpiece. 5 you digs. So that's a 5 for a 5.00. 5 is as high as you get, baby. That's a 5. Of course. And if you think that we give out the 5s too easy, we're not when it comes to Akira. But join us next time for Comics Revisited. We're probably going to have some more 5 you digs because next time on Comics Revisiting, we're revisiting Volume 3 of The Sandman, Dream Country. 4 absolutely amazing stories, all in the Sandman world. Y'all, we've only done the first 2 books of Sandman. We ain't even started. Shit ain't even started yet. I'm very excited. So join us then. Do join us tonight For PCP Movie Night, a very special edition. We got a great panel assembled to talk about Superman, Superman 2, Superman 3, and Superman 4. And join us Saturday night for Dylan's Horror Show as we kick off March Madness with The Entity. It's a movie that's uncomfortable, but in the best way possible. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today to talk about Akira. If you've never read this book, you absolutely have to. It is worth it. Trust me, 100%. Don't just take my word for it. I have 3 other panelists that agree. Manny, thank you for joining us, man. Final thoughts. What's coming up? What you got?
I've got Wednesdays. I do these short little 4 to 5 minute reviews of books that I read. So I'll have that going on. March 11th, I've got Rockin Robbie coming on the show with Ron V, David Boer, and another panelist yet to be announced. So really, really excited to talk about legacy characters, existing worlds, and how that impacts the creative process and what it means to us fans to look at those works. So really excited to have that roundtable discussion.
Hell yeah, that's gonna be a great show, Manny. Thank you so much for including me there, Brian. Thank you so much for being here, man. Any final thoughts? And we'll see you tonight on the Superman show.
Yeah, I'm really stoked about that one. It's going to be a good crowd, and I've already watched the movies. I'm ready to go. I will say that we'll talk about it on Monday, but yeah, I'm different now than when I first saw those movies. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. But not just read more comics. There's a lot of pretty good manga out there, and everything. So plenty of cool things to check out, like Urasawa, Junji Ito, this is such a powerful work that, when we were talking legacy earlier, and we were talking about like cartoony, figures and everything like that. If you go much further back than this and some of the manga, that is kind of what you have, and that's I'm not a manga expert by any stretch, but I have a feeling that's one of the things this one did is it brought more realism into the art there, because like if you look at someone like Urasawa or Junji Ito and things like that, it's a lot more realistic and just really powerful stuff. So those are my final thoughts. Just read more comics, read more manga.
Absolutely,
let's talk about it.
Hell yeah. What about you, Brooks? Any final thoughts?
Well, I don't have anything to plug in particular, I guess, except for the Superman thing, but we already did that. So, just know that Lord Akira is always watching over you. And go in peace.
Hell yeah.
Peace of Lord Akira.
Hell yeah. Thank you all for joining us. And for my final thought, I'm just going to go with the classic Tetsuo!